Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to reintroduce to you now. Dr. Mariela Glandt is a returning guest on our show. Be sure to check out her recent appearance on episode 429 of Boundless Body Radio. Dr. Mariela Glandt, trained as an internist at Harvard and an endocrinologist at Columbia University, has more than 2 decades of experience in the treatment of diabetes and chronic disease. Several years ago, she discovered the growing low carbohydrate movement, and based on what she was learning and observing, she had decided to change her approach to the treatment of diabetes. She is the founder and director of the Glandt Center for Diabetes Care in Tel Aviv, which specializes in optimization of diabetes care through the use of a very low carbohydrate diet. Dr. Glandt is involved in clinical trials, actively publishes articles in medical journals, lectures in Israel and abroad, and teaches medical residents at Bronx Hospital in New York. She is also the co-founder of Eatsane, which makes low carbohydrate food products with no artificial sweeteners. Dr. Mariela Glandt was a presenter at Low Carb Denver 2023 and did an amazing job presenting her talk titled Treating Diabetes Requires a Whole New Paradigm. Dr. Mariela Glandt, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you back to Boundless Body Radio.
Oh, you're so sweet. It's great to be here. Really
It's
great.
so great to have you back. I loved our conversation that we had last time. Again, it was a recent appearance, and we got to learn about HK, your wonderful patient who had turned around all kinds of metabolic disorders and is feeling much better off so many medications. You and I were just kind of talking offline about how difficult it is to kind of contain the passion for sharing this message. And when I see your work, I can see absolutely such a passion of you just wanting to share this message with everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would definitely share that because, as we were saying, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And you just want to, you want everybody around you to know. It's just that you kind of feel bad for most of the world that they don't know this, right?
Yeah, and they might not be ready to know it. They might not be ready, and it's tough.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. Timing is everything. So
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it takes all of us, and all of us have our part, and we want to make sure that we're always just continuing to share it and keep the message out there so that when people are ready, they can find it. Before we deep dive into the content that we'll get into today, honest question: where in the world are you today?
In the world, I am in Madrid, Spain.
Great. So you were in Spain last time. I believe you were also in Madrid. Have you been there for a while now?
Yes. I'm here. We came kind of as an adventurous trip for a year, or I don't know how long it'll be, with my family. It was a COVID decision to kind of do something different, which it's kind of a long story, but I can actually blame my sister for this because she's in California and my parents are in Argentina, and we kind of all decided to meet here in Spain for the family reunion because I was coming from Israel. So
yeah. Are you missing Israel at all?
Oh, well, I go back all the time. I go like every 6 weeks or every 2 months at most. So
gotcha.
I do go back all the time, but otherwise I would miss it. I mean, the clinic is there and everything. So
yeah. Well, all of the places we've already just covered all sound like beautiful places. I told you we've had record levels of snow here, and the sun's finally just coming out for the first time of the year. I'm very grateful for that. I've heard Madrid, the climate is absolutely amazing.
Yes, it's gorgeous, like super, super gorgeous right now. It's like amazing. It's like crisp, blue sky. It's great.
Wow, so, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. So for the listener who is not familiar with you and your work, can you remind us about your story and how you were able to find a different paradigm in the treatment of metabolic disease?
Yeah, at the risk of kind of boring everybody again, I would just say that I was a regular old endocrinologist for 20 years, treating high sugars, giving more insulin, doing what you think is best for patients. Ran into a couple of videos really by the Sarah Hallberg famous video, and started reading Jason Fung, and my very good friend Jessica Apple had been prodding me all along to listen up. Even though she's not a doctor, she knows more than most doctors. So I ended up really finally saying there is something really interesting here, and that just took me on this journey. I mean, I'll never forget the discovered this. It was like, oh my God, I can't believe I've been practicing this long without knowing this, and it's almost like a new career, to be honest.
It must have been so wonderful to actually go from what we talked about last time, kind of managing disease and think you're doing the right thing by the patient versus what you're doing now, where you're actually seeing reversal. Was it difficult for you to learn the process of doing things like deprescribing medications?
Maybe it was, but I don't remember it. I don't remember the process. It kind of all happened. I don't know. I think when I was very lucky that the first few patients were very receptive. So it gave me a lot of confidence to do this because the results were so positive. And yeah, I don't remember the process of learning how to deprescribe, but I guess I learned it along the way.
Yeah. So that's a message that you hear quite often is people will say, well, people are not willing to do this. The patients are not willing to change their diet. It's very difficult. It requires a lot of habit change. Has that been your experience, or is it more like you're describing in the beginning, like more people are willing to do this? They just don't know about it.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of it has to do with the conviction of the doctor. So if I'm looking at a patient and I say to them, this is going to help you, I'm 100% sure of it. This is going to be good for you, try it. Or, I can give you medication. I've been doing this for a long time. I can give you either way. I leave it up to the patient to decide. But I think almost always they choose the diet. It's very,
Almost,
very different. Yes.
almost always. Wow.
Yes. If they don't, they'll go for medication plus diet, but it's very rare. I can think of maybe one patient that said, leave me alone, I just want the meds. Like, it's really rare. Most patients are willing to at least hear about it. It doesn't mean that they're gonna go all the way, okay? It doesn't mean that we're gonna go keto, but they're very open to trying once you put it in a certain context, which is why I think it's so important for the message to come from the doctors. This is really, really important, because the minute I contradict their primary care doctor, then the doubts start, right? So, and it's very typical for that to happen, because, I guess doctors still have some kind of, authority that the patient thinks that they should be listening to them. So, I try to phrase it in such a way that is not blaming the doctor at all, but kind of working with the doctor, just kind of enhancing the doctor's like taking care of the metabolic disease by giving, say, statins and treating their hypertension. Let's complement that by really treating the root cause, and then try not to be too clashing. But if you're not too clashing, then you get a lot of compliance.
Okay, so you're getting that compliance not only with the patients, but also with their primary care doctors, or has that been very difficult?
It was very difficult at first, and then once the doctor saw the results, actually, I recruited those doctors on board. Let's just say, they don't necessarily practice low carb, but a lot of them have referred patients, or they're comfortable with me being the consultant to them, etc. So it's not. I think that once they see a case, then they're more relaxed, and then they're like, yeah, go do that program.
That's really hopeful to hear that. That's really optimistic. You're finding the doctors at least open to have that discussion. I haven't found that as much around me, but that's, again, very optimistic that you're seeing that. And this ties in directly with your new baby, as you described to us last time, Health. This is something you started recently to start to work with healthcare professionals. Can you tell us what your mission is with the company?
Yes. Our mission is for patients to be to learn, understand, and undergo the change in order to be metabolically healthy. We know, as everybody says, the 88% of Americans are unhealthy, right? This gets quoted a lot. So just about anybody can benefit from this. And it's basically it's a service that helps the primary care doctor actually prescribe a low carb diet. So you can kind of like outsource Onahelp to help you as a doctor to treat your patient better. And we partner with the primary care doctors. and we are basically like a coaching service. So that's really, this is really where we're going. So we are, we partner with them, we're a coaching service, but we do have doctors in the coaching service. So it's doctors, but we don't really take over the care. We kind of just work with the primary care doctor to help them make the right decisions.
Gotcha. That's fantastic. It's so cool that you're doing that. The story that you hear very commonly is that the medical system is set up to keep people sick so that they can continue to have a customer for as long as possible. Keep somebody sick, but keep them alive as long as you can so that you can have somebody continuing to use procedures and medications and that kind of thing. So in this model, if it's actually working, I'm assuming you're sending people home, you're getting people off medications. Is that going to be financially viable as an option for doctors to be able to pursue?
Well, I think that it is. We're working on this model right now. I think that it will be a win-win for the doctor and for Onahelp and for the patients. So, but I think it's a matter of finding all the right alignments. There's no question that the more you dig into this topic, which is very foreign to me, the financial part of medicine, you understand that there really so many things are misaligned, and this is part of the problem. The incentives are not aligned, and so the patient ends up suffering in the current system. So we can blame so many players here. But I mean, there's so many different groups are responsible for this mistake, for the way that this is made. So it's a real shame, and I think that Onahelp does actually align the interests of the doctor, the interests of the patient, and I think we'll hopefully be able to make money. So
yeah, great.
Well.
That's yeah, so helpful. So you're also working with coaches with Onahelp. Can you explain how that component works with kind of a coach as a go-between between the doctor and the patient himself?
Yeah, actually, you interviewed one of the coaches for Onahelp here. Tia Reed is one of our coaches.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that.
Yes, she's starting to, I mean, we haven't launched yet, but we're getting ready. So Tia will be one of our coaches. I think, for example, Tia is a great example of somebody who's been through a lot of, the traditional medical system has been pumped up with many drugs and had to go through her own of thanks to many doctors, good doctors in the low carb space that helped her. Dr. Cyrus, Dr. Apata, and I know that they were very wonderful in helping her go through this process. And she's blossomed into something amazing, a person who can really relate and empathize with other people. And this is what we're looking for. We're looking for people who can help mostly with the emotional part, because everything else is very, we will provide the diet and the menu, etc. But the actual empathy is what I think is the real key here. And it is this coach that will take the patient through the journey. And there's a chat that's constant, or ongoing. The patient uploads their metrics and the coach answers as needed. There are also group meetings. There's also daily content so that we can continue to learn at all times and deepen our understanding, because it's so different and it requires so much education. I believe that, we see we launched already in Israel, we see a real big correlation between those people that actually watch the videos and read the material and learn every day, and how well they do. Of course, they will only read if they're motivated, and so it's not a causation, but you see how much we really see that the education it's a big part of getting into this, because there are so many challenges, right? When you're doing low carb, there's so many temptations that it's really nice to have a community and a support system and an education to back you up. If you don't have that, it becomes much harder. So that's what we're trying to provide.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now, are you sure about hiring Tia? I don't know if she's like nice enough. She's really not that nice. And she's also so introverted. Like, I don't know if she'll be able to empathize with people the way you want. You sure that's a good call?
I think it's hard to beat Tia, isn't she the best? Really, she's something else.
She's
But
amazing.
we're working with some really, we're growing a list of really beautiful, amazing people. So anyway,
That's fantastic.
I think the coaching is really key, but it is combined with medical advice. Okay, so we have doctors also that are advising on how to advising, not prescribing, but advising on how they would do things. And we have this pretty standardized. Dr. Cucuzella, I'm sure you know him, maybe we talked about him in the past. He's doing we have it's published, a de-prescribing protocol. So it is better when doctors are involved, but in general, since we're de-prescribing rather than prescribing, that's more the goal of the doctor here.
That's fantastic. Dr. Cucuzella, another example, somebody who's just not very nice, just really, really hard to get along with. Okay, so when I first became a nutrition coach, they offered a software platform that I could coach people on. And I was somewhat familiar with low carbohydrate diets, but I took this certification that it's all about balanced meals, lots of grains, lots of fruits and vegetables. And so I kind of, doubled down on my effort to coach people in that way, and then give them habits where I could always coach up the habits and say, well, you're not doing well enough. Very similar to who you mentioned, Jason Fung, blaming the victim. It was really easy to carry on coaching somebody because you could always blame them for not doing a good enough job. And the software coaching platform, it was cool.
Jason says the opposite, right?
Yes, exactly. Yes, blaming. Yeah, what we're doing in the standard medical system is blaming the victim. Yeah, we give them terrible advice. They can't follow the advice, and we tell them that they're the problem. Anyway, the software program would give people daily lessons. It would give them a way to be accountable. I could coach them through the software platform, and it was really well done, I would say. I don't think the advice was great, but I had a really, really, really tough time with compliance. I put hundreds of people through this program, and I had 2 people ever finish the year-long curriculum that they had with me. So again, that's maybe not a fair comparison because I don't think this advice works very well for people. But what are you noticing as far as compliance? Are you noticing that people are sticking with the program, they're appreciating the coaching, they're actually like doing the work and taking the time to watch the videos and try the foods? Is that something you're noticing?
So far we see that that most patients are renewing their subscription and are compliant. So we actually, as we're speaking right now, our group meeting in Israel is going on. We try to be very hands-on. I'm not there because the other people are leading it, which is fun. Actually Slava, our amazing chief scientist, is leading it, Slava Berger. So what we see is that there has to be a readiness for change. Okay, so that has to be there, and in a way, I think you can't force somebody. It's like telling people to quit smoking. It's not going to happen unless there's a desire for it. It doesn't matter how much you talk their ears off and try to explain all of it. If they don't really have that click, that trigger, that something that made them want to leave it. So it's really important to identify what is the motivation for joining. And also to assess their degree of sugar addiction, and to understand, what they're looking to get out of it. And also to understand that, even if you fail, quote unquote, that's not the word that's appropriate here, but even if you're not able to stick with the diet for a while, okay, it's not the end of the world, nothing happens. And it's not a punishment, and it's not, you don't need to, it's not a grade, okay, and the ketones are not a grade, and it's really important to me that people view this as a journey, and sometimes you're going to be great, sometimes you're not. I actually saw this morning a patient with type 1 who was doing fantastic for years and off insulin and fantastic for years. And now she had like a traumatic life event. and she kind of lost the diet. And she was like, all along, I felt like this diet, actually, I was almost like grateful for diabetes, because this diet was giving me so much power, is how she described it. And now I lost the power, and I felt, first of all, she saw the beauty of being low carb. But anyway, I was telling her, this is, it's okay. It's okay. Life happens and things happen, and you just get back on. And the sooner you do, the sooner you'll be able to deal with the life problems, because it'll give you the mental clarity and the strength. And, sometimes they say, just make your bed when you're not feeling well. Make your bed. Do one good thing in the morning that gets you going in the right direction. Well, I feel like the same thing with the diet. Like, get back to the meat and eggs and veggies, and soon everything else will get better. Maybe it's, of course, oversimplified, but there is something to that. To first get, so anyway, back to the compliance question. I think that the readiness is the biggest factor here. But once they're on this track, I think it's a lot of empathy. That's why, Tia comes to mind again. It's a lot about a lot of empathy and community. And not everybody wants to be a part of the community, but it's also something that it has to be individualized. But speaking of individualized, I think that the path is also what we're studying now, how different patients need to be, how, each one, there are different types of people that need different types of support. Some people want to be nudged all the time, some people don't. Some people want to be SMS'd at 9 a.m., some people don't. Some people want, we have to learn what that person's journey should look like. And that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Wow. It sounds like a wonderful program. And I'm just thinking, as you're talking about all of this, one thing that was missing from what I was doing at the time was the group support. And it's like you said, not everybody is going to choose to take advantage of that. But having that group support must be so important, not only to be with the coaches, but also other people that are in your similar situation. It's just such an energy that you can feed off of that. And it's so empowering to hear other people's stories.
Yeah, I think it is. And so, finding the right balance for everybody is also important, meaning that, sometimes if you do too many group meetings, it doesn't work. And so you need to spread them out more, etc. We're in a big learning curve.
Yeah. Well, that's great. You mentioned something that's so important too, that I really don't want to miss. For patients to feel empowered, it's got to be so important. And that's got to drive up the compliance percentages of people sticking with the program. If you can show them that they do have control in a world where we are literally now telling people that obesity is genetic, that by age 2, if you're showing signs of obesity, you can get nutritional counseling, 2-year-olds. We can start to prescribe Ozempic at age 12. We can do bariatric surgery at age 13, because this obesity problem is so big and so important that we need to start early with drugs and procedures. It's not in your control, it's genetic. So let's deal with it and get you on these prescriptions as soon as possible. I mean,
yes. So sad, so sad. Just, devastating, really, and this is what, what Onahelp is about. Let's empower people to understand that the health is in their hands. Why not? We know that this is so simple that it's almost ridiculous. It's so simple. It's just that people, because we're blinded by all the sugar addiction, we can't see it. So it's impossible for people to fathom that they have so much power. And this is what we're trying to get the message out, right? That's what you're doing, right?
Yeah, I'm trying. Yeah, absolutely. Now, you are such an expert at explaining metabolic syndrome. Last time we talked, you gave us an amazing summary of insulin resistance and how that is. So for the listener, if you haven't heard that first episode, please go back, episode 429. You did an amazing job describing that in a way that I feel like is very understandable for people. And as I was reflecting on what we should talk about today, I wanted to talk about metabolic syndrome for sure. But I feel like so often, it's like you said, since so many people have metabolic syndrome, it's almost like harder to define what isn't metabolic syndrome and what doesn't cause metabolic syndrome. So what, in your opinion, is metabolic health, and how do we create metabolic health? What things happen that make our bodies run the way that they are supposed to?
Well, I think metabolic health, let's see, if I had to find one definition, rather, my tendency is to go for the absence of, the absence of, I would say triglycerides less than 70, HDL greater than 65. I would go with the criteria of metabolic syndrome and negate them. But really, you want low insulin levels, right? Because when you have low insulin levels, what you're doing is using energy very effectively. And that's really what you want. When you have low insulin levels, and it may not just be the diet, and of course exercise also plays a big role, and sleeping plays a big role, and being a person that's not too stressed out all the time, these are all important components. But the main component to me is, am I able to get them, to use energy in a very efficient way? If one of the beautiful things about eating keto or eating a very low carbohydrate diet is that you are able to get much more ATP when you burn fat versus burning glucose. So for every run of the citric cycle, and the electron transport chain, etc., you get a more bang for your buck, right? So I think that you're going to just have let's put it this way: if we look long term, right? Recently, I've been looking at the regulators of longevity, mTOR and AMP kinase and the sirtuins, and how actually insulin affects all of these three things. You don't want high insulin, because high insulin is going to work in the wrong direction as far as its influence on these regulators of longevity. And actually, ketogenic diet, for example, makes more NAD+, which boosts your sirtuins, for example. So there, it's kind of a long-winded answer, but what do I define as? I think I'm going back to low insulin for all of these reasons.
And this is where I would refer the listener to your website, where you have beautiful curves where you show the different macronutrients and how they respond to insulin. When you consume carbohydrates, that the carbohydrates you consume are going to be converted into glucose, cleaved off into glucose. It's going to end up in the blood, where the insulin is going to be pumped so that you can stuff all of that carbohydrate into storage. And you see this big tall curve and a big sharp crash. With protein, it's much more muted. With fat, it's hardly anything at all. Do I have that right?
Correct. So if you're constantly eating carbs, your insulin peaks are high all the time. And then, and what ends up happening is that you have high insulin constantly, and you lose that very critical balance between storage and using. So once you've done that, and you have a high fasting insulin, because why should your insulin be high in the morning? So if you have an insulin higher than 5, I already don't like that. Okay, I like insulin low, and the lower it is, the more metabolically healthy you are. Okay.
Sure. Yeah. And so carbohydrates, non-essential in the diet, but probably just fine in the diet if we were still eating the way we've always found them, where they're going to be extremely regional. They're going to be very seasonal. You're not going to get them for a very long time. They are designed in our bodies. Our bodies are designed to get, fat when we eat them. We're supposed to use the fructose and add fat to the body to prepare us for a winter time when we're not going to see those. Do I also have that correct? It's not fair to blame carbohydrates. It's more to blame the availability and non-seasonality of carbohydrates.
I would go further. I would say that it depends on the carbohydrate. Okay, there's a really big difference between a potato and high corn fructose syrup. Okay, so there's a really big difference in how it actually behaves in the body. So the word carbohydrate it's an umbrella term that contains a lot of things, but out of all of them, I think the fructose is doing a lot of damage, because we don't know how to regulate fructose. it's not regulated like glucose is. And because of that, it acts actually like alcohol, okay? And it's something that we can eat, but it's not necessary. And it's something that can only be metabolized by the liver. And it's something that in the end ends up harming us because we can't really regulate how much comes in. We don't have any hormones that regulate fructose consumption, the fructose consumption. So, but I would say that what makes this whole story more confusing, okay, is that the seed oils are, I think, in my mind, equally to blame for the insulin resistance. So while the carbs are easier to explain, you know, you just the high insulin peak, etc. I think it's actually, it's not the carbs. It's just that you have to eliminate the carbs once you have insulin resistance. You have to eliminate all of them, okay? But you have to, in order to get there to insulin resistance, and I think you need at least, you know, the fructose and the seed oils together. This is what really is leading to a sickness.
Yeah,
So
interesting.
if you look at the Chinese, yeah, what do you got there?
So I was just going to say, I got this book as an advanced copy from Chris Kenobi. We're going to have him on the show for a second time, The Ancestral Diet Revolution. He writes all about seed oils, and he's so good. He taught himself to be an amazing public speaker so he could go around to conferences and like be a presence and like get his message across. He's a wonderful human being. And this book all about seed oils, it's pretty convincingly making the case that like it's not necessarily the carbohydrates, it's more the seed oils. And one of the benefits of a low carbohydrate diet is by just the sheer nature of lowering the carbohydrates that you eat, you're definitely going to be lowering the amount of seed oils that you eat too. So it's interesting. It's cool speculation to say, you know, what is actually the cause of this, but you can eliminate pretty much all of that by doing a low carbohydrate diet. You don't have a lot of seed oils anyway.
Right. First of all, Chris Kenobi is amazing, and I had him as a guest at in the Metabolic conference in Israel. So I know his work, and he sent me a copy of the book as well. So I cheer, you know, kudos to him. I really hope he is able to get his message across. The thing is that yeah, he shows really, you know, that, you know, what happens when you have a well-formulated diet, as Steve Finney has labeled this, you know, well-formulated ketogenic diet. When you do that, you eliminate the seed oils, actually, just by definition, because you're eating real fat. So when you do that, that makes everything, you know, you get rid of the two things that are causing insulin resistance. But again, I go back to the fact that once you have high insulin, if you eat a potato, which is only glucose, it will still turn into fructose and get you in trouble. Okay, so this is the work of Rick Johnson, and it's, you know, what we see. Remember at the conference we heard him as well.
So good. It was so good.
Phenomenal. And so I think that the key here is that you must also eliminate the carbs all of the carbs in order to reverse disease. But you don't necessarily have to take away all the carbs if you're trying to prevent, as long as you don't have the seed oils and the fructose. This is my understanding after 8 years of being in this field, you know, in the field of low carb. This is where I think this is really what makes the most sense. Because if you look at, you know, just look at the Chinese, right? They or many Indian cultures, actually, they eat a lot of carbs, but it's not until you throw in the fructose and the seed oils that everything goes haywire.
Interesting. That's such a good point. Okay, so on that note, you can come on our show and trash carbohydrates for fructose anytime. I don't consume any. I know you pretty much don't consume any, so we can trash carbohydrates whenever. There is a movement in the carnivore space now where people are consuming animal-based diets, but they're adding in a pretty asinine amount of fructose in the form of fruit and honey into the diet, like hundreds of grams a day. Does that make you a little bit nervous?
Yes, it does. But I mean, I couldn't do it on my patients. Okay, if you're a complete healthy, exercising an hour a day, 2 hours a day, 3 hours a day, surfing, whatever, and you can afford that because your insulin level is so low, then fine, no problem. But my patients can't get away with that, okay, because they have sickness, they have diabetes and insulin resistance that's severe. So if I do that, I will instantly revert to sickness. I don't think we can be doing hundreds of grams of fructose. I don't.
Yeah.
I think you have a lot more flexibility if you're a healthy person.
Gotcha. Okay, so that was kind of my issue. Yeah, no, good point. That was kind of my issue was with the advice was that the people hearing this are not that person that you're describing. They are people who have a sugar addiction. Maybe they just got past that sugar addiction and now they're hearing advice to eat lots of fructose. Well, that's just going to start everything right back up. And I know tons and tons of people who have followed that advice and gotten totally derailed and sidetracked, and it's really tough. So okay, is that the caveat though? Like if somebody is very healthy and they're moving a lot, they can eat that much fructose, or is it still to some extent going to not be a great idea?
I mean, like I said, fructose is I think, fructose turns into fat when you've eaten more than you should have. I don't know what that number is. The dose makes the poison, right? I think Gary Taub said, talking about fructose, it depends. A little bit is not going to kill you, but if you're in my opinion, if you're already insulin resistant, stay away from it. I prefer you have a potato than well, let me think about it. I don't know. No, forget the potato. I just think, there's so much, it's so easy to get it wrong. Okay, you can go, it's so easy to cheat or to eat carbs unknowingly, that to say I'm going to eat carbs, I just feel like you're going to overshoot like crazy, because if you're in the real world, carbs are everywhere and they're going to creep in everywhere. So in the real world, you're already eating carbs. What are you fooling? It's not, there's no, what are the percentage of people that are actually eating 100% carnivore for months on end? It's very, very hard. Okay, so carbs always creep in. Even in people that I know that are very, very strict, they still once in a while carbs happen. So to plan for more carbs, if indeed you are extremely healthy, then go ahead. You can have carbs once in a while. I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
But I have a problem with that from the get-go. If you're extremely healthy and your insulin levels are low, have fruit, have some carbs. It's not going to be the end of the world. Just don't have the seed oils and don't have a lot of fructose, and then you will prevent sickness. My grandma is 101, and she's awesome. She's amazing. Talked to her yesterday. She's like playing cards, and she's like really unbelievable. And I think the key, when I look back and I am asking myself, what is it about her? Besides the fact that she's an extremely positive person. I think, she has always eaten real food. So it's so much of it is about avoiding the processed food. This is like 99% of it.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. That's so cool about your grandma. Definitely don't want to play cards with elderly women. They are card sharks. They're really, really good. They run the table on you. My grandparents are in their 90s, and they're very active. And my grandpa rides his bike every single day, and they're not on any specific diet, but they eat real food, and they just keep it at that. And they recognize that when they were growing up, they had some fruits and vegetables, but it was very seasonal. You couldn't find fruits and vegetables in February around here. It's cold and snowy, and they knew that. And they what we would consider maybe weird things like sardines and all kinds of stuff, and they're very healthy. And it's not a particular diet they're on; they're just eating real food. So I love that. I think that's wonderful advice, just to stick with whole foods wherever you decide to go there. So I feel like we've done a really good job defining metabolic health. Insulin has to stay low. Let's focus on consuming fats and proteins to be able to give us the building blocks and good, clean energy that's going to burn clean in our bodies. Let's try to reduce the carbohydrates to as low as somebody could tolerate, especially if they're manifesting signs of metabolic disease. So let's talk about metabolic syndrome. How is that defined? And what are some of the, I guess, what are some of the diseases that associate with metabolic syndrome?
Okay. So metabolic syndrome, called syndrome X at first, because X is really the insulin, right? It's the elephant in the room, but it should have been used in the name, but unfortunately it wasn't. It's defined by high triglycerides, low HDL, increased waist circumference, high sugar, and high blood pressure. Okay, so these are the main components. When you have these, when you have 3 out of 5, then they call it metabolic syndrome. Okay. The issue is that it is associated with just about every chronic condition, just about every. I mean, it's hard to exaggerate here, because really, wherever you look, okay, you see that having persistently high levels of insulin, which is the not the definition of, but let's just say that in metabolic syndrome, you always have high insulin levels. Okay, and what happens here is that it's a derangement of how energy is used in the body, and what we see is that cancer is increased in a dramatic way, and in any case of insulin resistance, because through different pathways, but don't forget that insulin is a growth hormone. Cancer is one, but cardiovascular disease, and strokes, and Alzheimer, and these are the big ones. But then there's so many others. Okay, there's so many others, and aches and pains and autoimmune diseases and literally just about everything. I mean, it is rare to find a disease that you can't find an association with high insulin levels or metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome, I'm not necessarily saying it's the cause, but it will always make things worse. Yeah. So its presence just exacerbates and accelerates any disease process. Yeah.
One that I'm hearing a lot of that's becoming really persistent, and hopefully more people are at least talking about it so they're aware of it, is non-alcoholic fatty liver syndrome. Hear that a lot. And we're seeing it in like teenagers. So we assume they're not, alcoholics at that point, but they're still getting this terrible disease. Can you explain how that's also related to metabolic syndrome?
Yes. So remember we were talking about the fructose becoming fat. Okay. So part of that fat accumulates in the liver. Now there's never ever supposed to be fat in the liver. Okay. The liver stores glycogen, but it ships out the fat to be stored in fat cells, and fat needs to be stored in the fat cell. And when it's not, then it starts to spill over into many other parts, like, for example, the liver. So when the liver is overstuffed with fat, or whenever there's fat in any organ, it renders that organ incapable of doing its job properly. So the liver doesn't, the liver responds to insulin by taking up glucose from the blood into the cells of the liver. Okay, and it's like one of the sinks of glucose, and converts it into glycogen. Well, when the liver doesn't work well, actually, because of the fat that's in it, the liver now starts to pump out glucose instead of responding to insulin and shut it. What insulin brings in the glucose, but what I'm saying is now, instead of bringing in the glucose, it actually spits out the glucose. Okay, so it's like resistant to the insulin now. Okay, any organ that has fat in it becomes insulin resistant. Okay, so look at muscle, same thing. when there's fat in the muscle, it's kind of like there's too much energy in the muscle. So the muscle starts to be insulin resistant. This is through various more complex mechanisms. But bottom line is fat in the liver, fatty liver, is actually almost like a sine qua non. Like you need it. It's what leads to insulin resistance. Although I have to say that not when in the studies, I always think that 100% of patients with diabetes are going to have insulin resistant, are going to have fatty liver. And I'm sure they do, but I just haven't seen it in the papers being 100%. Okay, so I can't say that. But to me, it's like if you probably have it, but you just don't see it. And by the way, fatty liver, 50% of the time you don't see an increase in the liver function test. So for sure you don't see it in liver function test. But even more sophisticated tests like abdominal ultrasound, I think you might still miss it. And there are other more sophisticated tests as well. But you can have fatty liver and not see it on the LFTs and the liver function test and not see it on abdominal ultrasound.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so you explained in your talk at Low Carb Denver how dangerous that ectopic fat is, and it's not inert. It's not just sitting there. It's actually actively doing things that are quite harmful. Can you describe that?
Sure. I mean, fat actually is a very active organ, and we didn't know that. We thought it was like this white blob, but actually, fat secretes a lot of cytokines, and these cytokines are, in many cases, just causing the inflammation that is also part of insulin resistance. So, once you activate the immune system, this is a very bad thing for health. So, you want the immune system quiet. You want the immune system chronically quiet and to act properly in the case of an acute infection. But what obesity and ectopic fat does is that it causes like a chronic low-grade inflammation, which is not welcome.
Yeah, you had such a passion about writing about metabolic health during the pandemic. Do you still believe that if we would have focused a little bit more on metabolic health, we could have had a much better outcome with the COVID-19 pandemic?
Absolutely. Instead of giving donuts to our volunteers, we should have been getting everybody, we should be getting the whole country on keto, really. I actually do have like a booklet that came out that's called How to Eat in Times of COVID, and that we did this with the nonprofit, which allthesweetlife.org. And, we try to get the message out, but that really didn't go far.
Yeah. Well, I would just tell you as a piece of advice, don't put that book too far off to the side. The COVID-19 pandemic might be over, but there's surely going to be other ones to come. And that information is going to be very, very valuable. So don't push the book off too far away just yet. Okay.
It's only $1 on Amazon. The point was to help, to reach the masses and get people out there to know that there's something they can do. But
yeah, that's amazing of you. That's so cool.
Well, so I owe it to Jessica again. She really is the driver.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Okay, so this is all not looking great. In my episode with Tia, I made sure to ask her, like, okay, you're telling me that carbohydrates are addictive. If that is true, if carbohydrates are addictive, then we have a huge problem, because I can leave my house and within 3 minutes, I could find 15 stores that can sell me sugar, whatever sugar I want, in so many different forms. I told her, like, even my hardware store, as you're going to the checkout, is full of sodas and candy bars. Like that's not looking too good for people. But tell us about the things that you've seen with people with these very severe chronic diseases being able to reverse them and get out of this situation. Like the fat that you're describing around the liver, can that be dealt with and burned off and gotten rid of? Or is that something that person's going to have to live with?
No, of course we can get rid of it. That's why we're working so hard, right? Because we want people to know that they can reverse this. Now, here's the catch. In order to burn fat, you've got to stop eating carbs, okay? Because if the minute carbs come in, you're going to burn that first. So the only way to burn fat is to really get the carbs out of the picture. And this is all you need to know. Once you get that, okay, you start getting rid of that fatty liver. And actually, the part that comes out first, once you start burning fat, is the ectopic fat. So it's actually not that hard to do. It's very easy to do if you stop eating the carbs. The thing is, like you said, they are addictive and they're everywhere. So it requires a lot of mental work to try to keep this very, very, very focused and very, just like you have to be like a horse. You have to be very, very self-confident and very, surround yourself by the people that are going to be supportive and not bring you down, because a lot of people are going to want to bring you down. And a lot of people are also going to be skeptical and even if they do support you. So it takes a lot of, this is why I'm talking about the education all the time, because you need a lot of, you need weapons and arms to fight the people that are going to bring you down. So to get to go into that supermarket in a way, you have to, first of all, shop only in the outside aisles, right? And stay away from the middle 100%. And look at food actually as more of a thing. Sometimes I look at these packages and I'm like, what is this, right? It has nothing to do with nutrition, zero. So this is part of your relationship with food has to change in order to get over the addiction. So
yeah. Well, and it's tough when you're in the position that you're in or the position I'm in. I forget all the time what my process was like. I mean, I had read, Nina Teichel's amazing book, The Big Fat Surprise, before I got my nutrition certification and kind of unlearned everything and started recommending grains and fruits and vegetables to everybody again. You forget that it's tough. It's not easy to make this transition. It is a process, and people need time and patience, and people like Tia to be able to help them along when they need help. And I just think it's so cool what you're also doing with Eatsane. Can you tell us about Eatsane and what your goal is with that?
Yes. Eatsane, I call it, it's about my rule that the best is the enemy of the good, because Eatsane started when I was maybe a year or two into treating patients with low carb, and the patients were all the time complaining that the one option for bread that was low carb in Israel was not tasty. And they were making the bread at home. They were spending all this time trying to figure out how to do that when they didn't have any time for cooking, etc. So Eatsane was born from my clinic by one of my patients, and his daughter had type 1 diabetes, and it's a long story, but to make a long story short, we started making keto products with no artificial sweeteners, because I couldn't find things with no artificial sweeteners, which I'm trying to get people off of the addiction, right? So if I put in a ton of artificial sweeteners, then I didn't do much for them. So Eatsane is basically low carb food with no artificial sweeteners. And therefore it has a tiny bit of sugar, okay, or maybe a tiny bit of real carbs, but it's just enough for it it's very, very little. But it actually, you can eat like a type 1 diabetic can eat without injecting, like 2 slices of bread or have our chocolates or various products without injecting. It depends. Sometimes you can, but because sometimes there are a lot of almonds in these products. So anyway, over the years, I became more and more of a purist. So, I find it hard to, you have to personalize this. So for Eatsane, I think that if you're the kind of person that cannot do the diet and without bread, then I will say, you know what, then try Eatsane. But my first choice is actually try it without, because what you really want to do is break that bread dependence. And so first, I think that's why I call it, it's when, let's see, I don't know what the right word for it is, but basically it will help. It's very helpful for people who want to do a low carb diet and maybe don't have the motivation to go all the way hardcore, or for those people who just want to eat, low carbish or healthy and don't want the 30 grams of glucose that come with the 2 slices of bread. So instead they get 4. Okay, so it's a real big help. So again, the best is the enemy of the good, enemy of the good. I find that it's important to remember that when treating patients. So,
Yeah.
so
It sounds
yeah,
like a great tool. It is effective in helping people as a bridge to kind of get off of that kind of stuff eventually.
yeah, for many patients it is, exactly. It's, you know, when you start this diet, you tell somebody you can't have bread ever again, it might be very scary. But if you say, you know, start with this, but it depends, it really depends on the personality. I prefer to start cold turkey.
Yeah, yeah, I do too. It just doesn't work with everybody. We have to be pragmatic and give people other options because I see it oftentimes. I don't know about you, but I see it mostly with women and the taste for meat and animal products in particular. When somebody's maybe transitioning from standard American diet, they're eating way too low protein, but they don't have much of a taste for it. It's difficult for them, even if it's fish or chicken, to eat more. They kind of don't really want to do it until they start. And then it starts to transition. It gets easier for them to eat the protein. And then they start to build a taste for red meat too, where maybe the texture wasn't great or wasn't craving it. All of a sudden, they start craving steak and they can't even do chicken anymore. That's just kind of a natural progression in taste that I noticed. You notice the same?
Absolutely, absolutely, especially true for vegetarians. I find that Eatsane is really helpful for vegetarians, you know, because it's very hard to do a low carb diet if you're not going to eat animal products. And so slowly they're able to add more and more animal products. But the bread gives them a really good bridge. Absolutely.
Yeah, very cool. Well, it's cool that you're doing that. I would kind of feel the same way that like, you know, I want you to use this product. I don't want you to use this product forever. I'd rather you do whole foods, but we need to keep in mind that we need to make this easy for people. And you're certainly doing that. I absolutely love your passion and your ability to communicate clearly some of these, you know, really complicated things in a way that we can understand and appreciate. So I just love your work. I'm so grateful for you that you had the time to come on our show today. We know you're very busy with lots of things going on. But can you tell our audience one more time where they can go to find you to connect with you and your work?
Well, our Glandt COIL/EN is the Glandt Center, is where you can read about the treatment, what we're doing, and Ona.health is the our new initiative, yeah, it's Ona.health. So you know, come check us out and come you know, get involved. We'd love that.
Excellent. We will definitely link to all of that in the show notes. Again, Dr. Mariela Glandt, thank you so very much for taking time to be on our show today. I know you're very busy, but we love your message. And again, to have you clearly communicate with that has been just such a joy. So thank you so very much. I hope to see you again in another low carbohydrate conference very soon.
Great. Thank you so much. You're awesome.
It was such an honor to host you. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.